Question 1. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential breach of internal policy by a Gokaldas exports employee concerning the handling of sensitive client information. The information suggests this may have occurred via the employee's company-provided email account. What is the most appropriate immediate next step for the reporting manager to take? Option A. Ignore the report as it may be unsubstantiated and could lead to privacy concerns if investigated. Option B. Consult with Gokaldas Exports Human Resources and legal departments to determine the appropriate investigation protocol. Option C. Immediately access the employee's company email account to review the contents for evidence. Option D. Directly confront the employee about the alleged policy breach without any prior internal consultation. Correct answer is C. Immediately access the employee's company email account to review the contents for evidence. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential compliance issue with the imperative to maintain data privacy and adhere to internal policies. The Gokaldas Exports Hiring Assessment Test likely emphasizes understanding of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance within the Indian context, given the company's operations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any investigation is conducted in a manner that is both effective and legally sound, avoiding overreach or unauthorized access. The correct approach involves initiating a formal, documented internal investigation that respects employee privacy and adheres to Gokaldas Exports' established data handling and investigation policies. This approach is right because it ensures that the investigation is conducted systematically, with appropriate oversight and a clear audit trail. It aligns with principles of natural justice and due process, protecting both the company and the employees involved. Specifically, it would involve consulting with the HR and legal departments to ensure compliance with Indian labor laws and data protection regulations, such as the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, 2023, which governs the collection, processing, and storage of personal data. This ensures that any access to employee data is justified, proportionate, and conducted with the necessary permissions and safeguards. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing an employee's personal email account without explicit authorization or a formal investigation protocol is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a serious breach of privacy and could violate Indian data protection laws, leading to legal repercussions for Gokaldas Exports and disciplinary action against the individual conducting the access. It bypasses established internal controls and ethical guidelines, creating a precedent for unauthorized surveillance. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the potential issue due to fear of overstepping boundaries, is also professionally unsound. While respecting privacy is crucial, failing to investigate a credible compliance risk can expose Gokaldas Exports to significant legal and reputational damage. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to uphold the company's responsibility to ensure a compliant operating environment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Acknowledge and document the reported risk. 2. Immediately consult with relevant internal departments, such as HR, legal, and compliance, to understand the scope of the issue and the applicable policies and regulations. 3. Determine the appropriate level of investigation based on the severity and nature of the risk, ensuring it is proportionate and respects privacy. 4. Follow established internal procedures for investigations, including obtaining necessary authorizations and maintaining confidentiality. 5. Document all steps taken and decisions made throughout the investigation process. 6. Implement corrective actions and preventative measures as identified. Question 2. Comparative studies suggest that companies often face challenges in balancing operational efficiency with employee data privacy. Gokaldas Exports is currently exploring avenues to optimize its operational costs. A proposal has been put forth to analyze employee performance data, attendance records, and remuneration details to identify potential areas for cost reduction. However, concerns have been raised regarding the ethical and legal implications of accessing and utilizing this sensitive employee information. Which of the following approaches best navigates this situation in compliance with Indian regulatory frameworks and ethical standards? Option A. Proceed with the analysis of all available employee data, including performance metrics, attendance, and salary information, to identify the most significant cost-saving opportunities, assuming that the company has an inherent right to access and utilize employee data for business improvement. Option B. Initiate the data analysis immediately based on managerial directives to identify cost-saving measures, without seeking explicit employee consent or conducting a formal legal review, as the urgency of cost reduction takes precedence over potential privacy concerns. Option C. Share anonymized employee data with external consultants for analysis, without informing employees about the data sharing or the specific purpose of the analysis, to ensure confidentiality and expedite the identification of cost-saving opportunities. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of Gokaldas exports existing data privacy policies and relevant Indian data protection laws, such as the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, 2023, to determine the lawful basis for processing employee data, obtain necessary consents, and ensure transparency with employees regarding the purpose and scope of data analysis for cost optimization. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of Gokaldas exports existing data privacy policies and relevant Indian data protection laws, such as the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, 2023, to determine the lawful basis for processing employee data, obtain necessary consents, and ensure transparency with employees regarding the purpose and scope of data analysis for cost optimization. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of Gokaldas exports with the long-term ethical and regulatory obligations concerning employee welfare and data privacy. The pressure to quickly implement cost-saving measures must not override legal compliance and ethical considerations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed solution is both effective and legally sound. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing data privacy policies and relevant Indian data protection laws, such as the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, 2023, to understand the legal framework for handling employee data. This approach prioritizes compliance by ensuring that any data processing or sharing for the purpose of identifying cost-saving opportunities is done with explicit consent where required, or based on legitimate interests that are carefully balanced against employee privacy rights. It also necessitates clear communication with employees about the purpose and scope of data analysis, fostering transparency and trust. This aligns with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and accountability mandated by Indian data protection regulations. An incorrect approach that involves indiscriminately accessing and analyzing all employee data without clear consent or a defined legal basis would violate the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, 2023. This failure to obtain consent or establish a lawful basis for processing personal data constitutes a significant regulatory breach. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with data analysis based solely on managerial discretion without consulting legal or HR departments, risks overlooking critical legal requirements and ethical considerations, potentially leading to severe penalties and reputational damage for Gokaldas exports. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes cost savings above all else, disregarding the potential privacy implications for employees, demonstrates a lack of ethical responsibility and a failure to uphold the company's duty of care towards its workforce, which can also have legal ramifications under various labor and data protection laws. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core objective, cost savings, then immediately assesses the legal and ethical constraints. This involves consulting relevant legal counsel and HR experts to understand the applicable regulations, e.g., Indian data protection laws, labor laws, and ethical best practices. The next step is to explore potential solutions that align with these constraints, prioritizing transparency, consent, and data minimization. Regular review and risk assessment throughout the implementation process are crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and ethical conduct. Question 3. The risk matrix shows that a new regulatory framework impacting international trade has been introduced, and its description indicates a significant potential for operational adjustments for Gokaldas exports. What is the most appropriate initial step for a Gokaldas exports employee to take in response to this information? Option A. Consult with the Gokaldas Exports Compliance Department to understand the specific implications of the new regulation for the company's supply chain and export procedures. Option B. Assume the new regulation will not significantly affect Gokaldas Export's current operations and continue with existing processes. Option C. Search for general information about the new regulatory framework on industry forums and make operational adjustments based on common interpretations. Option D. Immediately implement changes to all export documentation processes to preemptively comply with the new framework. The correct answer is D. Immediately implement changes to all export documentation processes to preemptively comply with the new framework. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gokaldas Exports employee tasked with assessing the implications of a new regulatory change on the company's operations. The challenge lies in interpreting the impact of the regulation, which is described as significant, and determining the appropriate course of action without direct calculation. This requires a nuanced understanding of regulatory compliance, risk management principles, and the specific business context of Gokaldas Exports. The employee must move beyond a superficial understanding to a deep analysis of potential consequences, demonstrating sound judgment and ethical consideration. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with the new regulation by seeking clarification from the compliance department and understanding its specific implications for Gokaldas Export's supply chain and export processes. This demonstrates a commitment to regulatory adherence and risk mitigation. By consulting internal experts, the employee ensures that the interpretation of the regulation is accurate and tailored to the company's operations, aligning with the principles of due diligence and responsible corporate conduct. This proactive engagement is crucial for identifying potential compliance gaps and developing appropriate strategies to address them, thereby safeguarding Gokaldas Exports from potential penalties and reputational damage. Incorrect approaches analysis. Ignoring the new regulation or assuming it has no impact is a direct violation of regulatory compliance principles. Companies are obligated to stay informed about and adhere to all applicable laws and guidelines. This passive approach creates significant legal and financial risks for Gokaldas Exports, potentially leading to fines, sanctions, and loss of business. Relying solely on external, unverified information without internal validation is also professionally unsound. While external sources can provide initial insights, they may not fully capture the specific operational context of Gokaldas Exports. This can lead to misinterpretations and the implementation of ineffective or even detrimental compliance measures, exposing the company to regulatory scrutiny. Focusing only on immediate operational disruptions without considering the broader compliance and ethical implications is short-sighted. While operational efficiency is important, it must be balanced with a thorough understanding of regulatory requirements. A failure to consider the full scope of the regulation's impact can lead to unintended compliance breaches and ethical lapses, undermining the company's integrity and long-term sustainability. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, they must acknowledge the existence and potential significance of the regulatory change. Second, they should prioritize understanding the specific requirements and implications of the regulation for their organization. This often involves consulting internal compliance teams or legal counsel. Third, they should assess the potential impact on the company's operations, finances, and reputation. Finally, they should develop and implement a plan to ensure compliance, which may involve process adjustments, training, or seeking further expert advice. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and aligned with regulatory obligations and the company's best interests. Question 4. Regulatory review indicates that an employee at Gokaldas Exports is responsible for overseeing a critical supplier selection process. The employee discovers that one of the shortlisted suppliers is owned by their sibling. The employee has a close personal relationship with their sibling and is aware of the supplier's capabilities. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to take in this situation? Option A. Avoid any direct involvement in the evaluation of the sibling's company, but continue to participate in the overall supplier selection process for other shortlisted vendors. Option B. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the compliance department, and recuse themselves from all aspects of the supplier evaluation and selection process related to this supplier. Option C. Proceed with the evaluation of all suppliers, including the sibling's company, and make a recommendation based on objective criteria, assuming their personal relationship will not influence their judgment. Option D. Discreetly favor the siblings' company during the evaluation process, ensuring it meets the minimum requirements but highlighting its strengths over competitors. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the compliance department, and recuse themselves from all aspects of the supplier evaluation and selection process related to this supplier. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Gokaldas Exports due to the potential conflict between a personal relationship and professional duties, specifically concerning the procurement process. Maintaining objectivity and avoiding any perception of impropriety is paramount in such situations. The challenge lies in navigating the personal connection while upholding the company's integrity and adhering to its procurement policies and relevant regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all decisions are made in the best interest of Gokaldas Exports and are free from bias. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the appropriate authority within Gokaldas Exports, followed by recusal from any decision-making processes involving the supplier. This upholds the principle of transparency and avoids any conflict of interest. By informing management and stepping aside, the employee demonstrates integrity and ensures that the procurement process remains fair and unbiased, aligning with ethical business practices and any internal company policies designed to prevent favoritism. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the evaluation without disclosing the relationship. This failure to disclose constitutes a breach of trust and potentially violates internal company policies on conflicts of interest. It creates an environment where decisions could be influenced by personal ties rather than objective merit, undermining the integrity of the procurement process and exposing Gokaldas Exports to reputational damage and potential regulatory scrutiny if such practices are deemed non-compliant with broader corporate governance principles. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to subtly influence the evaluation in favor of the acquaintance's company, even without explicit disclosure. This is a direct ethical violation and a form of misconduct. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to compromise professional standards for personal gain or to benefit a friend, which is unacceptable in any professional setting and could lead to severe repercussions for both the employee and Gokaldas Exports. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation and hope it goes unnoticed. This passive approach is also a failure of professional responsibility. It allows a potential conflict of interest to fester, increasing the risk of an undisclosed bias influencing decisions. It demonstrates a lack of proactive ethical behavior and a disregard for the importance of maintaining a transparent and fair business environment within Gokaldas Exports. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, integrity, and adherence to company policy. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the immediate steps should be: 1. Identify the potential conflict. 2. Consult company policy on conflicts of interest. 3. Disclose the conflict to the appropriate supervisor or compliance officer. 4. Recuse oneself from any decision-making related to the conflict. This systematic approach ensures that ethical standards are maintained and that the company's interests are protected. Question 5. Consider a scenario where a financial analyst from a reputable investment firm contacts a mid-level manager at Gokaldas Exports, requesting specific, non-public details about an upcoming product launch that is expected to significantly impact the company's revenue. The analyst states they are working on a time-sensitive report and believes this information is crucial for their analysis. The manager is aware that this information is material and has not yet been publicly disclosed. What is the most appropriate course of action for the manager at Gokaldas Exports? Option A. Acknowledge the inquiry, state that the information is material and non-public, and direct the analyst to the Investor Relations Department for official communication. Option B. Ignore the analyst's request to avoid any potential disclosure issues. Option C. Provide the analyst with the requested non-public details, emphasizing the need for confidentiality. Option D. Provide a general, non-specific overview of the product launch, without revealing any material non-public details. Correct answer is C. Provide the analyst with the requested non-public details, emphasizing the need for confidentiality. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect sensitive company data. Gokaldas Exports, like any publicly listed entity, operates under strict disclosure requirements and insider trading regulations. The pressure to provide timely information to stakeholders, while simultaneously preventing any unfair advantage, demands careful judgment. The correct approach involves a structured and compliant communication process. This means acknowledging the inquiry, confirming that the information is material and non-public, and then directing the inquirer to the appropriate official channels for disclosure. This adheres to the principles of fair disclosure and prevents selective disclosure of material non-public information, MNPI, which is a cornerstone of securities regulation designed to maintain market integrity and investor confidence. By deferring the response to the designated spokesperson or department, Gokaldas Exports ensures that all stakeholders receive the information simultaneously through official channels, thereby preventing insider trading and upholding regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach of directly providing the information to the analyst, even with the intention of being helpful, would constitute selective disclosure of MNPI. This is a serious regulatory failure, as it grants an unfair advantage to one party over others in the market. It violates the spirit and letter of insider trading laws and could lead to significant penalties for both the individual providing the information and Gokaldas Exports. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the inquiry entirely while seemingly avoiding disclosure is also professionally problematic. It can be perceived as evasive and may lead to speculation, potentially causing market volatility. Furthermore, it fails to meet the expectation of reasonable communication with stakeholders and could damage the company's reputation. A third incorrect approach of providing vague or misleading information is equally detrimental. This not only fails to address the inquirer's legitimate need for information, but also risks misinterpretation and can lead to accusations of market manipulation or deception. It undermines transparency and erodes trust. Professionals at Gokaldas Exports should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the information requested. Is it material and non-public? 2. Recognizing the potential implications of disclosure, insider trading, selective disclosure. 3. Consulting internal policies and procedures regarding information dissemination. 4. Directing inquiries to the designated point of contact for official company statements. 5. Ensuring all material information is disclosed through appropriate public channels. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates that Gokaldas Exports is evaluating potential new suppliers for its garment manufacturing operations. A prospective supplier has submitted a proposal that offers highly competitive pricing and impressive production capacity. However, their initial documentation regarding labor practices and environmental compliance is somewhat vague. What is the most professionally responsible approach for the Gokaldas Exports procurement team to take in this situation? Option A. Accept the supplier's proposal based on the attractive pricing and capacity, assuming their claims of compliance are sufficient for initial engagement. Option B. Focus solely on the supplier's ability to meet production deadlines and quality standards, deferring any detailed ethical or environmental checks until after a contract is signed. Option C. Immediately reject the supplier due to the vagueness in their compliance documentation, prioritizing certainty over potential cost savings. Option D. Conduct thorough due diligence, including requesting detailed evidence of labor and environmental compliance, seeking independent verification where possible, and assessing the supplier's overall ethical standing before making a decision. Correct answer is A. Accept the supplier's proposal based on the attractive pricing and capacity, assuming their claims of compliance are sufficient for initial engagement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gokaldas Exports employee tasked with evaluating a potential supplier. The challenge lies in balancing the company's need for competitive pricing with the imperative to adhere to ethical sourcing and regulatory compliance. Misjudging the supplier's claims or failing to conduct adequate due diligence could expose Gokaldas Exports to significant reputational damage, legal penalties, and supply chain disruptions. The need for careful judgment stems from the potential for misleading information and the complex interplay of business objectives and ethical responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted due diligence process that prioritizes verification and compliance. This includes requesting and scrutinizing documentation related to labor practices, environmental standards, and any relevant certifications. It also necessitates seeking independent verification where possible, such as through site visits or third-party audits. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with best practices in supply chain management, aiming to ensure that suppliers operate responsibly and in accordance with applicable laws and regulations, thereby mitigating risks for Gokaldas exports. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that solely relies on the supplier's self-declaration without independent verification is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the inherent risk of biased information and bypasses crucial due diligence steps. Ethically, it could be seen as negligent, potentially leading to the unwitting association with unethical labor or environmental practices. Legally, it could expose Gokaldas exports to liability if the supplier is found to be non-compliant. An approach that prioritizes the lowest price above all other considerations, disregarding the supplier's compliance claims, is also professionally flawed. While cost-effectiveness is important, it should not come at the expense of ethical and legal standards. This approach risks engaging with suppliers who may be cutting corners on labor, safety, or environmental regulations to achieve lower costs, thereby creating significant reputational and legal risks for Gokaldas exports. An approach that focuses only on the supplier's production capacity and delivery timelines, without assessing their ethical and regulatory standing, is incomplete and risky. While operational efficiency is vital, it does not address the fundamental requirement for responsible sourcing. This oversight could lead to the selection of a supplier who, despite being operationally capable, operates in a manner that is detrimental to Gokaldas exports' reputation and legal standing. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to supplier evaluation. This involves identifying potential risks, ethical, legal, operational, financial, assessing their likelihood and impact, and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies. For supplier selection, this translates to a structured due diligence process that includes verifying claims, assessing compliance with relevant regulations and ethical standards, and considering the supplier's overall reputation and track record. A balanced approach that considers cost, quality, capacity, and ethical/legal compliance is essential for sustainable and responsible business operations. Question 7. The investigation demonstrates that during the due diligence process for a potential acquisition, Gokaldas Exports deal team has obtained material non-public information, MNPI, regarding the target company's upcoming product launch and its projected market share. The deal team is considering how to best utilize this information. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and compliant approach for Gokaldas Exports? Option A. Advise key Gokaldas Exports executives not involved in the deal team to adjust their personal investment portfolios based on the MNPI. Option B. Share the MNPI with Gokaldas Exports marketing and sales departments to inform their strategies for competing with the target company's new product. Option C. Keep the MNPI strictly confidential within the deal team and use it solely for the purpose of evaluating the acquisition, with no external dissemination. Option D. Publicly disclose the MNPI to the market to ensure all investors have access to the information before the acquisition is finalized. Correct answer is B. Share the MNPI with Gokaldas Exports marketing and sales departments to inform their strategies for competing with the target company's new product. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to secure a competitive advantage and the regulatory obligation to ensure fair market practices and prevent insider trading. Gokaldas Exports, like any publicly listed entity, operates within a strict regulatory environment designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. The challenge lies in balancing the need for strategic information gathering with the absolute prohibition against using or disseminating material non-public information, MNPI, for personal gain or to disadvantage others. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate market research and potentially illegal insider dealing. The correct approach involves a rigorous adherence to regulatory guidelines concerning MNPI. This means that any information obtained during the due diligence process that is material and non-public must be handled with extreme confidentiality. The information should only be used for the intended purpose of evaluating the potential acquisition and must not be shared with any individuals outside the designated deal team who do not have a legitimate need to know. Furthermore, strict internal controls and communication protocols must be in place to prevent any leakage or misuse of this sensitive information. This aligns with the principles of fair disclosure and market integrity, preventing any unfair advantage for Gokaldas exports or its stakeholders. An incorrect approach would be to disseminate the MNPI to other departments within Gokaldas exports, such as the sales or marketing teams, even with the intention of leveraging it for immediate competitive advantage in existing product lines. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and a violation of insider trading regulations, as it allows individuals without a direct role in the acquisition to benefit from or act upon information that is not available to the public. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the public announcement of the potential acquisition to allow Gokaldas exports to consolidate its market position based on the MNPI. This is a clear attempt to manipulate the market and gain an unfair advantage, directly contravening the spirit and letter of securities laws. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to use the MNPI to influence investment decisions of individuals not directly involved in the acquisition process, such as advising friends or family to buy or sell shares of the target company. This is a direct act of insider trading. Professionals in such situations must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves establishing clear internal policies and procedures for handling MNPI, conducting regular training for employees on insider trading laws and company policies, and implementing robust oversight mechanisms. When faced with sensitive information, the default position should always be one of extreme caution and strict adherence to confidentiality. If there is any doubt about the permissibility of an action, seeking guidance from legal counsel or compliance officers is paramount. The focus should always be on maintaining market fairness and protecting the interests of all investors. Question 8. The analysis reveals that Gokaldas exports is experiencing significant supply chain disruptions, impacting production timelines and increasing operational costs. Management is concerned about the potential negative impact on the upcoming quarterly earnings report and the subsequent effect on the company's share price. They are considering strategies to mitigate the immediate perception of financial weakness. What is the most appropriate course of action for Gokaldas exports in this situation, considering its regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities? Option A. Proactively disclose the identified supply chain challenges and their potential financial implications to the board of directors, and if material, to the investing public through appropriate channels, while also developing a clear plan to address these issues. Option B. Engage in selective disclosure of the supply chain issues to a select group of institutional investors to gauge their reaction before making a public announcement. Option C. Temporarily defer the recognition of certain cost increases and delay reporting on the full extent of the production delays until the situation stabilizes to present a more favorable earnings report. Option D. Focus solely on highlighting positive operational achievements and market demand in the earnings report, while downplaying or omitting details about the supply chain disruptions. Correct answer is A. Proactively disclose the identified supply chain challenges and their potential financial implications to the board of directors, and if material, to the investing public through appropriate channels, while also developing a clear plan to address these issues. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial needs with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Gokaldas Exports, as a publicly listed entity, is subject to stringent disclosure requirements and market integrity principles. Misrepresenting financial performance, even with the intention of stabilizing share price, can lead to severe regulatory penalties, loss of investor confidence, and reputational damage. The core challenge lies in adhering to the principle of transparency and accuracy in financial reporting while navigating market pressures. The correct approach involves transparently communicating the identified operational challenges and their potential impact on financial performance to the relevant stakeholders, including the board of directors, and, if material, the investing public, in accordance with applicable securities laws and accounting standards. This approach upholds the integrity of financial reporting, fosters trust with investors, and allows for informed decision-making by all parties. It aligns with the regulatory framework that mandates accurate and timely disclosure of material information. An incorrect approach of selectively disclosing positive information while withholding negative details about the supply chain disruptions would constitute a violation of securities regulations. Selective disclosure can be construed as market manipulation or insider trading if not handled appropriately, and can mislead investors about the true financial health of Gokaldas exports. Another incorrect approach of delaying the recognition of potential losses or impairments to artificially inflate current profits would violate accounting principles and potentially lead to misstated financial statements, which is a serious regulatory offense. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves a thorough understanding of the applicable laws and regulations governing financial reporting and disclosure. When faced with challenging situations, professionals should consult with legal and compliance departments, seek expert advice, and err on the side of transparency and accuracy. The framework should include a process for assessing materiality, evaluating the impact of events on financial statements, and ensuring that all disclosures are fair, complete, and not misleading. Question 9. The evaluation methodology shows that a Gokaldas exports employee, while reviewing sensitive internal financial projections for a new product launch, accidentally discovers information that, if publicly known, would significantly impact the company's stock price. The employee has a personal investment portfolio and is aware of the potential for personal gain. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for this employee? Option A. Discuss the information with a trusted colleague in another department to get their opinion on the situation. Option B. Discreetly research the potential market impact of the information to gauge the extent of personal profit possible before deciding on a course of action. Option C. Immediately report the sensitive information and the potential conflict of interest to the Gokaldas exports compliance officer or legal department. Option D. Hold onto the information and wait to see if the market reacts to it naturally before taking any action. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the sensitive information and the potential conflict of interest to the Gokaldas exports compliance officer or legal department. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Gokaldas exports due to the inherent conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the employer. The requirement for careful judgment stems from the need to uphold ethical standards and comply with internal policies and potentially relevant regulations governing insider trading or market manipulation, even if not explicitly stated in the question's limited scope. The core issue is preventing the misuse of non-public information for personal gain, which can damage the company's reputation and lead to legal repercussions. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the potential insider information to the designated compliance officer or legal department at Gokaldas exports. This action demonstrates adherence to the company's internal policies and ethical guidelines, which typically mandate the reporting of any suspected breaches of confidentiality or potential conflicts of interest. By escalating the matter, the employee fulfills their duty to protect the company's interests and allows the appropriate authorities within Gokaldas exports to investigate and take necessary actions to prevent any regulatory violations or market abuse. This proactive reporting is crucial for maintaining market integrity and upholding the trust placed in employees. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the information or dismiss its significance. This failure to act could be interpreted as complicity or negligence, potentially violating internal codes of conduct and any implied duty to safeguard company information. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the information with colleagues who are not authorized to receive it, or to attempt to trade based on this information. This would constitute a direct breach of confidentiality and could lead to severe legal consequences, including insider trading charges, and would undoubtedly violate Gokaldas exports' internal policies designed to prevent such activities. Sharing such information, even without direct trading, can also be considered market manipulation or an attempt to influence market behavior, which is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and adherence to company policy. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest or breaches of confidentiality, understanding the implications of possessing non-public information, and knowing the established channels for reporting such concerns within their organization. When in doubt, the safest and most professional course of action is always to err on the side of caution and report the matter to the appropriate internal authority for guidance and resolution. Question 10. To address the challenge of understanding potential market shifts impacting Gokaldas' export supply chain, a senior manager needs to gather insights from a key supplier's recent performance data. The manager is aware that this data is sensitive and subject to confidentiality agreements. What is the most appropriate course of action for the senior manager to obtain this information? Option A. Ask a colleague within Gokaldas Exports who has previously worked with this supplier if they can informally share any performance data they might have retained from past interactions. Option B. Contact a junior contact at the supplier company directly via email, explaining the urgency and asking them to share any relevant performance reports they have readily available. Option C. Access the supplier's shared online portal without a specific request, assuming that as a key partner, Gokaldas Exports has implicit access to all their performance metrics. Option D. Formally request the data through Gokaldas Exports Procurement Department, clearly stating the business purpose and adhering to all internal data access and confidentiality protocols. The correct answer is D. Formally request the data through Gokaldas Exports Procurement Department, clearly stating the business purpose and adhering to all internal data access and confidentiality protocols. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect client confidentiality and ensure data integrity. Gokaldas Exports, as a publicly listed entity, operates under strict regulatory frameworks that govern how sensitive information is handled and disclosed. The challenge lies in obtaining necessary insights for strategic decision-making without breaching trust or violating compliance requirements. Careful judgment is crucial to navigate these competing demands. The correct approach involves a structured and compliant process for information gathering. This means initiating formal requests through established channels, ensuring all inquiries are documented, and adhering to Gokaldas Exports' internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines regarding data access and disclosure. This approach upholds client confidentiality, maintains data integrity, and ensures that any information obtained is used ethically and legally for legitimate business purposes. It demonstrates a commitment to transparency and responsible corporate conduct. An incorrect approach would be to bypass formal procedures and directly solicit information from junior staff or through informal channels. This risks obtaining incomplete or inaccurate data, as junior employees may not have the full context or authority to disclose sensitive information. Furthermore, it constitutes a breach of confidentiality and potentially violates internal company policies and regulatory mandates designed to protect proprietary and client-specific data. Such actions can lead to reputational damage, legal repercussions, and a breakdown of trust with clients and stakeholders. Another incorrect approach would be to assume access to information based on a perceived need or seniority. This disregards the established protocols and the rights of clients whose data is being handled. It can lead to unauthorized access and misuse of information, creating significant compliance risks and ethical breaches. Professionals must understand that access to information is governed by defined rules and permissions, not by assumption or personal convenience. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with identifying the specific information required and the legitimate business purpose for its acquisition. Subsequently, one must consult relevant internal policies and external regulatory frameworks to understand the permissible methods of obtaining and handling such information. If there is any ambiguity, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments is essential. The chosen method must prioritize ethical conduct, regulatory compliance, and the protection of confidential information at all times. Question 11. The review process indicates that a Gokaldas Exports employee who is involved in strategic sourcing decisions has been offered an opportunity to invest in a private company that is a potential supplier to Gokaldas Exports. The employee believes this investment could be lucrative. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee? Option A. Proceed with the investment and attempt to steer sourcing decisions towards the private company to ensure a return on investment. Option B. Discuss the investment opportunity with a trusted colleague at Gokaldas Exports to gauge their opinion before making a decision. Option C. Invest in the private company and discreetly monitor its performance, assuming personal investment will not influence professional judgment. Option D. Immediately disclose the investment opportunity to the Gokaldas Exports Compliance Department and seek guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. The correct answer is C. Invest in the private company and discreetly monitor its performance, assuming personal investment will not influence professional judgment. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Gokaldas Exports due to the potential conflict between personal financial interests and the company's ethical standards and regulatory obligations. The core difficulty lies in navigating the disclosure requirements and avoiding insider trading, which is strictly prohibited. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance and maintain professional integrity. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate authority within Gokaldas Exports, as per company policy and relevant securities regulations. This proactive step allows the company to assess the situation, implement necessary safeguards, and ensure that no confidential information is misused. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance, regulatory compliance, e.g., SEBI regulations in India, if applicable to the exam's jurisdiction, and ethical conduct, which mandate transparency and the avoidance of situations that could compromise fiduciary duties. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without disclosure, assuming the information is not material or that personal involvement will not influence decisions. This failure to disclose a potential conflict of interest violates company policy and ethical codes, and could lead to accusations of insider trading if the investment is perceived to be based on non-public information. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to influence the decision-making process at Gokaldas Exports to benefit the investment. This is a direct breach of fiduciary duty and constitutes market manipulation or insider dealing, carrying severe legal and professional consequences. Finally, seeking advice from colleagues without formal disclosure and approval bypasses the established compliance procedures and risks spreading potentially sensitive information inappropriately, creating further compliance issues. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to company policy, and regulatory compliance. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the first step should always be to consult the company's code of conduct and relevant policies. If a conflict is identified or suspected, immediate disclosure to the designated compliance officer or supervisor is paramount. This allows for an objective assessment and guidance on how to proceed ethically and legally. Question 12. What factors determine the appropriate communication strategy for a Gokaldas Exports executive when discussing a potentially significant new business contract with an external industry contact, ensuring adherence to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance? Option A. The potential impact of the contract on Gokaldas Exports' short-term stock price performance and the executive's personal bonus structure. Option B. The materiality of the information regarding the potential contract and whether it has been publicly disclosed. Option C. The executive's desire to impress the external contact and secure the deal quickly, regardless of information disclosure. Option D. The executive's personal assessment of the external contact's trustworthiness and their existing relationship with Gokaldas Exports. The correct answer is D. The executive's personal assessment of the external contact's trustworthiness and their existing relationship with Gokaldas Exports. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual at Gokaldas Exports to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with ethical standards and regulatory expectations, particularly concerning the disclosure of material non-public information. The pressure to secure a new business deal must be balanced against the imperative to maintain market integrity and uphold the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate business discussions and actions that could be construed as insider trading or market manipulation. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparent and ethical communication, ensuring that any discussions about potential business opportunities with external parties are conducted in a manner that does not involve the disclosure of material non-public information that could unfairly influence market decisions. This aligns with the principles of fair dealing and market integrity expected of publicly listed companies and their employees. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of regulations designed to prevent insider trading and promote a level playing field for all investors. By focusing on publicly available information and general business strategy, the individual avoids any actions that could be misconstrued as providing an unfair advantage. An incorrect approach that involves sharing specific, non-public details about the potential deal, such as projected revenue figures or the exact timeline of contract finalization, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This constitutes the disclosure of material non-public information, which can be used by recipients to make trading decisions, thereby violating insider trading laws and regulations. Another incorrect approach, such as downplaying the significance of the potential deal to avoid scrutiny, is also problematic as it can lead to misrepresentation and a lack of transparency, potentially misleading stakeholders and regulators. Furthermore, engaging in discussions that could be interpreted as attempting to influence the market price of Gokaldas export shares based on this non-public information would be a direct violation of market abuse regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest and regulatory implications. They should then consult internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. If there is any doubt about the appropriateness of an action or communication, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments is paramount. The principle of when in doubt, don't is a crucial element of professional conduct in such situations. The focus should always be on maintaining the highest ethical standards and ensuring full compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, prioritizing long-term integrity over short-term gains. Question 13. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a significant investor in Gokaldas exports has expressed strong interest in receiving an update on a potential new market expansion initiative that has been discussed internally but not yet formally announced. The investor has requested specific details about the projected timelines and potential revenue impact. Option A. Inform the investor that the information they are requesting is confidential and cannot be shared at this time, without further explanation of the disclosure process. Option B. Acknowledge the investor's interest and inform them that Gokaldas Exports is committed to timely and transparent disclosure of all material information through its official channels, and that further details will be communicated once they are finalized and approved for public release. Option C. Offer a preliminary estimate of the timelines and potential revenue impact, while emphasizing that these are subject to change. Option D. Provide the investor with the specific details regarding projected timelines and potential revenue impact, as they are a significant stakeholder, and the information is likely to be positive. The correct answer is B. Acknowledge the investor's interest and inform them that Gokaldas Exports is committed to timely and transparent disclosure of all material information through its official channels, and that further details will be communicated once they are finalized and approved for public release. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a stakeholder's desire for immediate positive news and the ethical and regulatory obligation to provide accurate and timely disclosures. Gokaldas Exports, as a publicly listed entity, is bound by strict reporting requirements designed to ensure market integrity and protect investors. The challenge lies in balancing the need for transparency with the potential for market manipulation or premature disclosure of sensitive information. Careful judgment is required to navigate this delicate balance. The correct approach involves acknowledging the stakeholder's inquiry while adhering strictly to Gokaldas Exports' disclosure policy and relevant regulatory guidelines. This means confirming that any material information will be disclosed through official channels at the appropriate time, without providing premature or selective information. This upholds the principles of fair disclosure and prevents insider trading or market distortion. An incorrect approach would be to provide the stakeholder with the requested information directly, even if it is not yet publicly announced. This constitutes selective disclosure, which is a serious regulatory and ethical breach. It can lead to accusations of insider trading and damage the company's reputation and investor confidence. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the stakeholder's inquiry outright, without offering any reassurance or explanation of the disclosure process. While not as severe as selective disclosure, this can be perceived as uncooperative and may lead to frustration and a breakdown in stakeholder relations. It fails to educate the stakeholder on the importance of proper disclosure procedures. A third incorrect approach is to speculate or provide an estimated timeline for the announcement. This can create false expectations and if the timeline is not met, lead to further disappointment and distrust. It also risks inadvertently revealing information that is not yet finalized or approved for public release. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding and adhering to the company's disclosure policy and relevant regulations. 2. Assessing the materiality of the information requested. 3. Responding to inquiries in a manner that is truthful, transparent, and consistent with disclosure obligations. And 4. Escalating complex or sensitive inquiries to appropriate internal departments, e.g., legal, investor relations, for guidance. Question 14. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern of inquiries regarding Gokaldas Export's upcoming quarterly earnings report from an employee in a department not directly involved with financial reporting. This employee has also recently accessed sensitive internal documents related to production forecasts. What is the most appropriate initial step for the compliance officer to take? Option A. Discuss the observed pattern with the employee's direct manager to gauge their awareness of the situation. Option B. Advise the employee to cease all further inquiries and document their access logs. Option C. Conduct a discrete internal review to ascertain the nature and materiality of the information accessed and the intent behind the inquiries. Option D. Immediately escalate the matter to the relevant external securities regulator for investigation. Correct answer is D. Immediately escalate the matter to the relevant external securities regulator for investigation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires immediate and accurate judgment regarding potential insider trading, a serious regulatory offense. The challenge lies in distinguishing between legitimate market information and potentially material non-public information, MNPI, that could be used for illicit. Gokaldas Exports, as a publicly listed company, is subject to strict regulations designed to ensure fair and transparent markets. Failure to act appropriately can lead to severe penalties for the company and individuals involved, including reputational damage and legal sanctions. Careful consideration of the information's nature, its source, and the potential impact on the stock price is paramount. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented investigation into the nature of the information and its potential materiality. This includes consulting with the compliance department and legal counsel to determine if the information constitutes MNPI. If it is deemed MNPI, then appropriate steps must be taken to prevent its dissemination and to ensure that no trading occurs based on this information. This aligns with the principles of market integrity and regulatory compliance, specifically the prohibition against insider trading as stipulated by securities laws. The focus is on due diligence, adherence to internal policies, and seeking expert guidance to navigate complex regulatory requirements. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the alert without proper investigation, assuming it is a false positive. This fails to uphold the duty of care and regulatory obligations to monitor for and prevent insider trading. Risks allowing MNPI to be used for trading, which is a direct violation of securities regulations and can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for Gokaldas Exports. Another incorrect approach is to immediately report the alert to external regulatory bodies without an internal assessment. While transparency is important, a premature external report without proper internal verification could lead to unnecessary scrutiny, damage to employee morale, and potential reputational harm if the alert is found to be unsubstantiated. The regulatory framework typically expects internal due diligence to be conducted first. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the alert with colleagues who are not directly involved in compliance or risk management. This could inadvertently lead to the dissemination of potentially MNPI, creating a wider risk of insider trading or market manipulation. It violates confidentiality principles and the strict controls required when handling sensitive information. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Acknowledge and document the alert immediately. 2. Assess the information's source and context. 3. Consult internal compliance and legal teams to determine materiality and regulatory implications. 4. If MNPI is suspected, implement predefined protocols to restrict trading and prevent further dissemination. 5. Escalate to external regulators only after internal investigation confirms a potential violation, following established procedures. 6. Maintain thorough records of all actions taken and decisions made. Question 15. Market research demonstrates a significant emerging trend in consumer preference for sustainable sourcing within the textile industry, a sector where Gokaldas Exports operates. Your team has presented this finding, highlighting potential opportunities for new product lines and revised marketing narratives. What is the most appropriate initial step for Gokaldas Exports to take in response to this market research? Option A. Advise the sales team to aggressively push existing product lines, emphasizing their quality and value, to maintain market share while the company assesses the sustainability trend. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive internal review of Gokaldas Exports' current sourcing practices, supply chain capabilities, and the feasibility of integrating sustainable materials and processes, alongside a validation of the market research's scope and implications. Option C. Publicly announce Gokaldas Exports' commitment to sustainability to capitalize on the trend, without detailing specific operational changes. Option D. Initiate immediate development of new product lines explicitly marketed as sustainable, based on the initial research findings. The correct answer is D. Initiate immediate development of new product lines explicitly marketed as sustainable, based on the initial research findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gokaldas Exports employee tasked with responding to a market research finding. The challenge lies in interpreting the implications of the research for the company's strategic direction, and ensuring that any proposed actions align with ethical business practices and relevant regulatory frameworks governing corporate conduct and market communication. The need for careful judgment arises from balancing the pursuit of business growth with the responsibility to act with integrity and transparency. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough internal review of the market research findings. This includes assessing the validity and reliability of the research, understanding its implications for Gokaldas Exports' existing product lines and market positioning, and then formulating a strategic response that is both commercially sound and ethically defensible. This approach is correct because it prioritizes informed decision-making based on verified data. It allows for a measured and responsible integration of new market insights into the company's operation, ensuring that any strategic shifts are well considered and do not lead to misleading communications or unfair competitive practices. This aligns with general principles of good corporate governance and responsible business conduct, which are implicitly expected in any hiring assessment for a company like Gokaldas Exports. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that immediately suggests a significant shift in marketing strategy based solely on the initial market research report, without further validation or internal consultation, is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses critical due diligence and could lead to decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate information, potentially resulting in wasted resources or reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the market research findings outright without a proper review process. This demonstrates a lack of openness to external feedback and a potential unwillingness to adapt to changing market dynamics, which can hinder a company's long-term competitiveness and growth. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on exploiting the perceived market gap without considering the ethical implications or potential impact on stakeholders is also professionally unsound. This could lead to aggressive or misleading marketing tactics that violate ethical standards and potentially regulatory guidelines related to fair competition and consumer protection. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first establishing a clear understanding of the information presented. This involves critical evaluation of the source and methodology of any market research. Subsequently, a structured internal discussion involving relevant departments, e.g., marketing, strategy, product development, is crucial to assess the findings' implications. Decisions should then be made based on a comprehensive understanding of the data, potential risks, and ethical considerations, ensuring alignment with the company's values and long-term objectives. This systematic process fosters responsible decision-making and mitigates the risk of acting on incomplete or flawed information. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that a new line of premium cotton apparel from Gokaldas Exports has generated significant customer interest. The marketing team, eager to capitalize on this momentum, proposes a campaign featuring taglines such as "Experience unrivaled comfort," "Naturally superior," and "The ultimate in cotton luxury." While the sales team believes these phrases accurately reflect the product's perceived quality and will drive sales, the compliance officer is concerned about the potential for these claims to be interpreted as unsubstantiated puffery or misleading statements. What is the most appropriate course of action for Gokaldas exports to ensure compliance with advertising regulations and ethical marketing practices? Option A. The legal and compliance departments must thoroughly review and verify all claims in the proposed marketing materials to ensure they are factually accurate and substantiated before dissemination. Option B. Proposed taglines can be used as they are, given that similar phrasing has been successful in past Gokaldas exports campaigns without significant issues. Option C. Marketing materials can be published immediately, and any potential issues or complaints regarding the claims can be addressed reactively after the campaign has launched. Option D. The sales team's assurance that the claims are generally true and reflect customer perception should be sufficient, and the materials can be approved based on this feedback. The correct answer is A. The legal and compliance departments must thoroughly review and verify all claims in the proposed marketing materials to ensure they are factually accurate and substantiated before dissemination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Gokaldas exports compliance team due to the inherent conflict between aggressive sales targets and the ethical imperative to avoid misleading advertising. The pressure to meet sales quotas can incentivize the use of exaggerated claims, which, if not carefully vetted, can lead to regulatory breaches and reputational damage. The challenge lies in balancing commercial objectives with the legal and ethical obligations to provide accurate and non-misleading information to consumers. This requires a robust internal review process and a keen understanding of advertising standards. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all marketing materials by the legal and compliance departments before dissemination. This ensures that claims made by Gokaldas exports are substantiated, factually accurate, and comply with all relevant advertising regulations. Specifically, this approach aligns with the principles of fair trading and consumer protection, which are fundamental to maintaining market integrity. By verifying that claims are not misleading or deceptive, Gokaldas exports upholds its ethical responsibilities and avoids potential penalties under advertising laws. This proactive stance safeguards the company's reputation and fosters trust with its customer base. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on the sales team's assurance that claims are generally true is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach bypasses essential due diligence and exposes Gokaldas exports to the risk of making unsubstantiated or exaggerated claims, which can be deemed misleading under advertising standards. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to compliance and a disregard for consumer protection principles. Approving marketing materials based on past successful campaigns without re-verification is also problematic. Market conditions, product features, and regulatory interpretations can change. What was acceptable previously may not be so now. This approach risks perpetuating outdated or non-compliant practices, leading to potential violations. Allowing marketing materials to be published immediately and addressing any potential issues only if a complaint is received is a reactive and highly risky strategy. This approach places the company in a defensive position, potentially facing penalties, legal action, and severe reputational damage before any corrective action can be taken. It fundamentally undermines the principle of proactive compliance and consumer protection. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Gokaldas exports should adopt a proactive and risk-averse approach to marketing. This involves establishing clear internal policies and procedures for marketing material review, ensuring that all claims are substantiated with evidence, and that legal and compliance teams have the authority to halt the dissemination of non-compliant materials. A robust training program for the sales and marketing teams on advertising standards and ethical conduct is also crucial. When faced with conflicting pressures, prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical considerations over short-term sales gains is paramount for long-term business sustainability and integrity. Question 17. The control framework reveals that a routine export transaction for Gokaldas exports has a minor discrepancy in the supporting documentation submitted by a new supplier. The operations team is eager to expedite the shipment to meet a critical delivery deadline. What is the most appropriate course of action for the compliance officer to ensure adherence to regulatory requirements while facilitating business operations? Option A. Inform senior management of the discrepancy and await their directive on how to proceed without any initial investigation. Option B. Proceed with the shipment as planned, assuming the discrepancy is minor and unlikely to cause regulatory issues, and address it later if it arises. Option C. Immediately halt the transaction and demand complete resubmission of all documentation from the supplier, regardless of the discrepancy's nature. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the discrepancy to assess its materiality and potential regulatory impact. Consult with the relevant internal department for clarification, and document the resolution process before authorizing the shipment. The correct answer is C. Immediately halt the transaction and demand complete resubmission of all documentation from the supplier, regardless of the discrepancy's nature. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge for Gokaldas' exports compliance team by highlighting a potential conflict between operational efficiency and regulatory adherence. The pressure to expedite a transaction, coupled with the discovery of a minor discrepancy in documentation, requires careful judgment to balance business needs with legal and ethical obligations. The risk lies in either delaying legitimate business unnecessarily or, conversely, overlooking a procedural lapse that could have regulatory consequences. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the discrepancy against the relevant regulatory framework governing Gokaldas' exports operations. This means understanding the materiality of the error, its potential impact on the transaction's compliance, and the established procedures for rectifying such issues. By seeking clarification from the relevant internal department and the counterparty, and documenting the resolution process, the compliance team ensures that the transaction proceeds with appropriate oversight and in accordance with regulatory expectations, thereby mitigating risk without unduly hindering business. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the transaction without addressing the discrepancy risks violating regulatory requirements if the discrepancy is material or indicative of a systemic issue. This approach prioritizes speed over compliance, potentially exposing Gokaldas' exports to penalties, reputational damage, and legal challenges. Escalating the issue immediately to senior management without an initial assessment of the discrepancy's significance or attempting to resolve it at a lower level can be inefficient and may create unnecessary alarm. While senior management oversight is crucial for significant issues, a premature escalation can strain resources and indicate a lack of proactive problem-solving within the compliance function. Ignoring the discrepancy and assuming it is insignificant is a direct contravention of due diligence principles. Even minor discrepancies can be red flags for more serious underlying issues or can be interpreted as a lack of adherence to established controls by regulatory bodies. This approach demonstrates a failure to uphold the integrity of the control framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a structured, risk-based approach. First, understand the nature and potential impact of the discrepancy. Second, consult the relevant internal policies and external regulations. Third, engage with the appropriate internal stakeholders and, if necessary, external parties to gather information and propose a resolution. Fourth, document all actions taken and decisions made. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both business objectives and regulatory compliance. Question 18. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for a key role at Gokaldas Exports has provided extensive personal information during the initial screening, some of which appears unrelated to the job requirements. The hiring manager is keen to review all provided details to gain a comprehensive understanding of the candidate's background. What is the most appropriate course of action for the candidate to take regarding this information? Option A. The candidate should immediately request that all provided personal information be deleted, citing privacy concerns, without offering further explanation. Option B. The candidate should proactively inform the hiring manager that certain information provided is not directly relevant to the role and request clarification on what specific data points are being used for the assessment, while also inquiring about data retention policies. Option C. The candidate should offer to provide additional, more detailed personal information that might be helpful for the hiring manager's review, even if not explicitly requested. Option D. The candidate should assume the hiring manager has a valid reason for reviewing all information and allow them to proceed without comment, trusting their professional judgment. The correct answer is B. The candidate should proactively inform the hiring manager that certain information provided is not directly relevant to the role and request clarification on what specific data points are being used for the assessment, while also inquiring about data retention policies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations concerning data privacy and confidentiality. The Gokaldas Exports Hiring Assessment Test is designed to evaluate a candidate's understanding of these critical areas. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment process itself adheres to legal and ethical standards, preventing potential reputational damage or legal repercussions for Gokaldas Exports. The correct approach involves a candidate demonstrating an understanding of the need for explicit consent and data minimization. This means recognizing that any information collected during the assessment must be directly relevant to the role, and that candidates must be informed about how their data will be used and have the opportunity to consent. This aligns with principles of data protection, which are fundamental to responsible business practices and often enshrined in regulatory frameworks governing employment and data handling. Specifically, it reflects the spirit of regulations that mandate transparency and control over personal data. An incorrect approach that involves collecting broad, non-essential personal details without clear justification or consent fails to uphold data privacy principles. This could lead to a violation of data protection laws, which typically require a lawful basis for processing personal data and prohibit the collection of excessive information. Another incorrect approach, which is to use assessment data for purposes beyond the hiring decision without prior notification or consent, constitutes a breach of trust and potentially a violation of data usage regulations. This demonstrates a lack of ethical consideration and in disregard for candidate rights. A third incorrect approach, which is to store assessment data indefinitely without a defined retention policy or a legitimate business need, also poses a significant risk. This can lead to unnecessary data accumulation, increasing the potential for breaches and contravening data minimization principles often found in data protection legislation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant legal and ethical obligations. 2. Assessing the necessity and proportionality of data collection. 3. Ensuring transparency and obtaining informed consent. 4. Implementing secure data handling and storage practices. 5. Adhering to data retention policies. In situations like this, the principle of privacy by design should guide actions, ensuring that data protection is considered from the outset of any process. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a proposed change in inventory valuation methodology for Gokaldas Exports could significantly reduce reported operating expenses. However, this change might result in a less conservative valuation of inventory, potentially impacting the reported profit margins in a way that could be perceived as less robust by investors. Considering the regulatory framework applicable to listed Indian companies, which approach should Gokaldas Exports adopt? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the proposed methodology against applicable accounting standards and disclosure requirements, seeking expert opinion to ensure compliance and transparency before implementation. Option B. Adopt the new methodology, but avoid disclosing the change in the annual report to prevent potential investor concern about the reduced conservatism. Option C. Implement the new methodology and highlight the resulting cost savings in investor communications without mentioning the change in valuation technique. Option D. Implement the new inventory valuation methodology immediately to realize the cost savings, as the primary goal of cost-benefit analysis is to improve financial performance. The correct answer is D. Implement the new inventory valuation methodology immediately to realize the cost savings, as the primary goal of cost-benefit analysis is to improve financial performance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing potential cost savings with ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. Gokaldas Exports, like any publicly listed company, operates under a framework of regulations designed to ensure transparency, fair dealing, and investor protection. The challenge lies in identifying and adhering to these regulations when faced with a proposal that offers financial benefits but might skirt the edges of acceptable practice. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate cost optimization and actions that could lead to regulatory breaches or reputational damage. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed cost-saving measure against the relevant regulatory framework governing financial reporting and disclosure for companies like Gokaldas Exports. This approach prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct. Specifically, it necessitates understanding the principles of materiality, disclosure requirements, and the potential for misrepresentation, ensuring that any accounting treatment or disclosure aligns with established accounting standards and regulatory guidelines. The company safeguards its integrity and avoids potential penalties. This upholds the principle of providing a true and fair view of the company's financial position, a cornerstone of regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate cost savings without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations of the company. For instance, if the proposed method involves classifying expenses in a way that misrepresents the company's operational performance or financial health, it could be deemed a violation of accounting standards and disclosure rules. This could lead to regulatory scrutiny, fines, and a loss of investor confidence. Another incorrect approach might involve overlooking the need for clear and transparent disclosure of such accounting treatments. Failure to adequately inform stakeholders about significant accounting policies or changes can be seen as misleading and a breach of trust, inviting regulatory action. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core objective, cost savings, and then systematically evaluates it against all relevant constraints, including legal, regulatory, and ethical considerations. This involves consulting with legal and compliance departments, seeking expert advice on accounting treatments, and prioritizing transparency in all financial dealings. The framework should encourage a proactive approach to risk assessment, identifying potential regulatory pitfalls before they materialize. Ultimately, the decision should be guided by the principle of long-term sustainability and reputation, which are built on a foundation of integrity and compliance. Question 20. Market research demonstrates that a new potential supplier for Gokaldas exports in a developing region offers significantly lower production costs. However, initial inquiries suggest that, while the supplier claims to adhere to local labor laws, there are anecdotal reports of long working hours and low wages in the region's garment sector. Gokaldas Exports' internal policy emphasizes ethical sourcing and compliance with international labor standards. What is the most appropriate course of action for Gokaldas Exports to take regarding this potential supplier? Option A. Immediately reject the supplier due to the anecdotal reports to avoid any potential association with unethical practices. Option B. Conduct thorough independent due diligence, including on-site audits and worker interviews, to verify compliance and assess risks before making a decision. Option C. Request the supplier to provide additional documentation of their compliance, but proceed with sourcing if the documentation appears satisfactory, without further on-site verification. Option D. Proceed with the supplier, assuming their claims of compliance are accurate and prioritizing the cost savings to enhance competitiveness. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the supplier, assuming their claims of compliance are accurate and prioritizing the cost savings to enhance competitiveness. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Gokaldas Exports' compliance team by requiring them to navigate potential conflicts between internal company policy and broader ethical considerations in international trade. The core difficulty lies in balancing the pursuit of competitive advantage through efficient sourcing with the imperative to uphold ethical labor practices and avoid complicity in human rights abuses. A hasty or uninformed decision could expose Gokaldas Exports to significant reputational damage, legal repercussions, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the company's actions align with both its stated values and the prevailing ethical and legal standards in the global garment industry. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, multifaceted due diligence process. This begins with a comprehensive review of the supplier's compliance documentation and certifications, followed by an independent audit of their facilities. Crucially, this audit must extend beyond paper compliance to include direct engagement with workers to ascertain actual working conditions and adherence to labor laws. If any discrepancies or concerns arise, Gokaldas exports should engage with the supplier to implement corrective action plans. Only upon satisfactory resolution of these issues, and with ongoing monitoring, should the sourcing relationship proceed. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with international best practices for supply chain responsibility, such as those promoted by organizations like the International Labor Organization (ILO) and various industry-specific codes of conduct. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible sourcing and mitigating risks associated with unethical labor practices, thereby protecting Gokaldas exports' reputation and ensuring long-term sustainability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on the supplier's self-reported compliance without independent verification is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This approach ignores the inherent risk of misrepresentation and fails to meet the due diligence expectations of responsible businesses. It could lead to inadvertent association with exploitative labor practices, violating ethical principles and potentially contravening laws that hold companies accountable for their supply chains. Accepting the supplier's certifications at face value without further investigation is also problematic. While certifications indicate a level of adherence, they are not foolproof and can be obtained through superficial means. This approach neglects the need for proactive risk assessment and due diligence, leaving Gokaldas exports vulnerable to reputational damage and ethical breaches. Prioritizing cost savings over ethical considerations, even if the supplier claims to meet basic legal requirements, is a failure of professional judgment and ethical responsibility. While cost efficiency is important, it should not come at the expense of human rights and fair labor practices. This approach risks undermining Gokaldas exports' corporate social responsibility commitments and could lead to severe backlash if exploitative practices are discovered. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Gokaldas exports should adopt a risk-based approach to supplier selection and ongoing management. This involves 1. Establishing clear ethical sourcing policies and supplier codes of conduct that align with international standards. 2. Implementing a robust due diligence framework that includes initial screening, independent audits, and ongoing monitoring. 3. Prioritizing transparency and open communication with suppliers regarding ethical expectations. 4. Developing a clear process for addressing noncompliance, including corrective action plans, and if necessary, termination of the relationship. 5. Continuously reviewing and updating sourcing practices in light of evolving ethical standards and regulatory landscapes. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued responsibly, safeguarding the company's integrity and long-term viability.